It was later combined with the rodeo, from which the Snake River Stampede had its outgrowth. Who knew we were that influential? And check out that 1.5-cent stamp on that envelope. By the summer of 1909, plans were underway to raise funds to construct a new church building that actually looked like a church. And on July 3rd, 1911, the new church building was dedicated. The cost of the new building was $8,000. You can probably buy the front door now for $8,000. Nampa was booming during the period of time from 1918 to 1920, and the church shared in the growth and prosperity. Lester Jones and his family arrived in Nampa in 1927. My mother wasn't even born by then. He was a promoter. Along with his traditional ministerial duties, Mr. Jones held rallies and revivals. With each event, there would be a new wave of members joining the church. By 1934, the average Bible school attendance was 374 people each week. Here's Lester Jones standing in front of the new church building, which we now refer to as the old church building, which we then refer to this building as the new church building. And I find it interesting that a building that's 70 years old, we call new. I like it. The church has always welcomed and supported various organizations within the community, among them the Boy Scouts. The first Boy Scout leadership was with men from the Baptist Church. Frank Kibler, who is featured here in his Boy Scout uniform, was the first patrol leader. With a lack of adult leadership, the original troop eventually disbanded, but was later started, again sponsored by the Christian Church. Frank Kibler went on to take several leadership roles in the church community. For 12 years, he served as a Sunday school superintendent. One little known fact about Frank Kibler, those who knew him, he played poker with Harry Truman. I don't know if that's an endorsement or not. But he was a highly respected attorney throughout the state of Idaho and our community here. He served as a city attorney for 3 different mayors. And we were blessed to have him as a part of our leadership in our church here. Recognize any of those people? It's said that the church is the people, not the building. One of our outstanding couples in the church was Willis and Frances Coyle. I can get... I don't seem to be... The couple on the right are Willis, and that would be Willis Coyle and Frances Carson at the time, along with Willis's sister Katie and Vic Wallace. Each of these couples would later marry, and we'll hear about the Coyles a little bit later. The relationships that one develops within the church become another family. For some, their church family and their biological family combined. For Clarion Fulton and Charlotte Frank, they went to church with their cousins. And pictured here are 3 of their cousins. Attending the church here were the 2 Carlin girls, 4 Ewings, and 6 Burlisles. 3 of the girls here are from the Burlisle family, and the shorter girl is Marilyn Coyle, Willis and Frances Coyle's daughter. When Willis and Frances Coyle got married, they felt that the members of the Gleaners class were a little older than their generation. So they helped start the Win a Couple class. Now you get it, Win a Couple. Here you see a group from the Win a Couple class standing in front of the old church building. Now, I think also part of the reason they didn't want to be part of the Gleaners class is that one evening the Gleaners were having a party in the basement of the church, and it got pretty loud. So the residents of the Colonial Apartments, which were on the back side of the same block that the church was on, called the police. And they reported that some drunks had broken into the church and were throwing a party. Here's the Win a Couple class. On May 15th, 1940, the congregation voted to erect a new building at a new location. 2 lots were purchased on the corner of 12th Avenue and 7th Street. The location was considered a long ways out. Later, a 3rd lot was added to the first 2, and groundbreaking for the new church building was conducted on July 18th, 1948. And this is the lane of the cornerstone, and Lester Jones in front of the cornerstone. Now, the budget for this building was $140,000. An early picture of the completed building. You'll recognize it. It's on the front of your bulletin today. As you can see, it's an early picture. There's no message board out in front. There's no traffic control box at the corner blocking the view of the church. The main entrance is facing the corner. The original windows on the south end of the building are still there. There was out on-street parking at that time, and there was no fence in the front yard. Here we have the program for the dedication of the church building, which was held on the afternoon of May 8th, 1949. This is a group of people who were all married by Lester Jones. During the almost 25 years that Lester Jones served as the pastor here, he married more than 500 couples. So how many people either were married by Lester Jones, show of hands, or their parents were married by Lester Jones? So you see, Lester Jones's influence is still alive and well here. In the front row, I don't know if I can get this to work or not. Okay. In the front row, we have one of our members here, the young lady with the glasses and the corsage. is Lucille Balthazar. And I've invited her to come and share a few things.
I don't know why they would pick me, just because I'm old. But it is an honor to be here. In 1935, my family moved to Nampa and to join my uncle and aunt who also lived in Nampa, and they went to the Christian church, so did we. Before we came here, I had lost my mother when I was 4 years old, and my dad needed a change in his life, so we moved to Idaho. In 1935 through 1948, like Janice said, the average Sunday school attendance was just over 350. Sunday school was divided into age groups with a leader for each of you, and you met as an entire group. You have to remember different times. We had in the old church, each group would have a meeting place. And then we would sing songs and have devotion. And then we would go to our separate classes for age group. And then in those classes, we had the lesson and roll call. Roll call was something that was leading up to what I'm going to tell you next. In 1937, I decided I wanted to try for a perfect attendance. I saw all these ladies and young people getting awards for attending every Sunday. So I thought, well, I can do that. I made it for the first 12 years. When my first son was born, he didn't cooperate, as he was born on Sunday morning. That was the end of my perfect attendance. In 1939, I was baptized on Easter morning, and Reverend Jones baptized 24 of us. Many years later, my husband and I found our baptismal certificates and found we were baptized the same day. There was a difference in our age, so I didn't really know him. In 1941, World War II started in my 9th grade. And where's Charlie? Charlie, it was World War II, not World War I. Church consisted of Sunday school, church service, plus Christian Endeavor. Anybody ever heard of Christian Endeavor? It was the young people's groups prior to the evening church service. So we didn't just go to church on Sunday. We were blessed with dedicated youth leaders. They had to be dedicated to keep 350 kids interested. Two that come to mind are Melvin and Gladys Terry. I don't know if you knew them, but they corralled we kids and gave us many social activities to keep us busy and out of trouble. And another couple was Insel and Edith Wiley. Been gone a long time. There were over 100 youth in a photo I have of high school and junior high. There wasn't room for us to line up in front of the church, so it was taken next door at the Colonial Apartments lawn. It had to be 1943 because it was before my brother went into the Navy. I realize in reflection, times were different. We had lived through a depression, then a war was declared, and we needed all the strength of the church to survive. The war ended the year I graduated, and the church was our entire social life. Can you imagine your church here being your entire social life? One reason was because we had no gas. Couldn't go anyplace. We had an A card that gave, the ration card gave Dad room to gas enough to get to work and home, and that's what all we were supposed to use it for. The Methodist Church was just across the street on 4th Street, and the Brethren Church was just 2 blocks away. Our high school groups combined for many social events. Between the 2 Lyda families and us and anyone else who wanted to play softball, we would get together on Sunday afternoon, and my dad would often be the umpire. During the war, we girls from church were given names of boys in the service from our church. And we were supposed to keep in touch with them with a letter writing project. Now this was, Reverend Jones did this, and he didn't know what was going to happen. The name I was given, it just happened to be my future husband's name. Turned out all right because the marriage lasted for 52 years. Janice asked for differences between the former church. There were no women on the diaconate or elders. The deacons also served as ushers for church service. Can you imagine having enough people that we have to herd them with ushers? But it might not be a bad idea. Women wore hats and gloves to church. Men wore suits. I know about the suits because my dad had to go borrow money from like we would call a loan shark at this day, to buy that suit, and it took a long time to pay it off. The youth were expected to behave in church, and if we didn't, I want to tell you about Reverend Jones, because he was the only minister I knew until I got married. Reverend Jones would stop his sermon and never say a word, but he would look at us until we stopped talking, and it only took once for me. We had evangelists come for revivals every couple of years. We couldn't afford them every year. Reverend Jones was soft-spoken, and so the evangelists that came were a new experience for me. I think you would call them Bible thumping. There was a lot of yelling. After moving to this location, this location, they asked me to teach the other half of a 6th grade Sunday school class. Mrs. Johnson had the other half. I felt sorry for my kids, so I tried extra hard, but felt they got cheated by having me instead of her. I would suggest you drive by the corner of 13th Avenue and 4th Street. It's not a street that you usually go down, but imagine how crowded we were with that many attending Sunday school.
Thank you, Lucille. We got ahead of ourselves here. Okay. All right. So you would call Lester Jones the marrying preacher with more than 500 marriages while he was here and only 470 funerals. I'm not quite sure what happened here, but this picture is out of place, but while it's up, we'll talk about it. The trivia question. In the late 60s, early 70s, the youth established a coffee house. That was the in thing then. Where was the coffee house in the church? Right, it was in the old coal bin. And where's the old coal bin? If you go down the baby steps by the side of the church, and instead of turning right to go into the church, or go into the kitchen, turn left, and there's storage and the furnace and the coal bin. So we'll see what picture we get next. Oh, and that's Patty Koyama in the dress on the left. Now, I'm not quite sure what happened, why some of these got out of order. As many of you are familiar with Miss Bird's book, My Hometown. She was a member of the church here. She was an early historian of the church. She wrote the summary of the history of the church for the 50th anniversary that was celebrated in 1956. If you don't recognize the image on the dust jacket, that's the old high school. When the new high school was built in 1956, I love it when we refer to these old buildings as new. This became West Junior High. And then after they built more junior high schools, this became the area where the new Civic Center is. And I asked Patty Koyama to share with us her relationship with Miss Bird. Is Patty here? There you are.
I met Miss Bird when I was 3 or 4 years old. But the history of her and our family go way back to when my father was in school. And Miss Bird taught, and she had my dad in her classroom. And when he was in junior high, I believe it was, he was in the, oh no, it was high school because he was in the junior varsity football team. And back then, they didn't have the protective football gear that people wear now. And him and 2 of his brothers were all on the football teams. And Miss Bird watched them play football. She lived down Lone Star Road from my grandfather. And so my grandfather knew her also. And one time when they were playing, my uncle George had played first in the first game, and Dad's brother Koichi played next. And during that game, he was injured the day before, or the football game before. He was injured. Him and another football player had run into each other and both suffered concussions. And they weren't checked by doctors at the time. Everybody just figured they were okay. So then when they played this next game, Koichi was tackled and he never got back up. And Dad had just finished his game and was coming to go sit with Grandpa to watch Koichi play. And when it happened, they called Grandpa to come down because he was injured and wasn't getting up. and they ended up taking Grandpa and Koichi to the hospital, and he died at the hospital. But Miss Bird loved their family, and she loved my dad because he was a good student. But after that happened, Grandpa said, "You boys can't play football anymore, because if something should happen to another one of you, then the friends of the family, the Japanese, we have a very strict culture." And he said that if one of the other sons were to get injured or died again in football, it would look really bad on the family with all the other Japanese friends. So he told them they couldn't play football anymore. And Miss Bird's class had the windows facing the football field. And Dad would sit there and watch the football practices, wanting to be out there, but he knew he couldn't. And he said, and he had told me this, that Miss Bird never said a word to him. She knew how much he loved football and how much he missed it. And she watched him watching the practices. And she never said a word to him about not paying attention in class. She was a wonderful, wonderful Christian woman. And when Mom and Dad got married, they were supposed to be the first couple married in this church, but it wasn't finished in time, so they didn't get to be the first couple married in this church, but they were married in this church. And when us kids came along, my grandfather was a Buddhist, but he wanted us kids to grow up as good Americans, and so he asked Miss Bird if she would bring us to church in a Christian church. And that's how I started in this church. Miss Bird would pick us up at Grandpa's house, because we lived in the house behind their house, and she would bring me and my brother and my sister to church with her. And I think I was about 4 years old when I started in this church. And she would bring us every Sunday. So because of Miss Bird and my grandfather wanting us to be in a good American Christian church, I started in this church and grew up in this church with all the kids that Janice and Jan and I all know, because we had a lot of high school friends that all came to church here too. And so I know the people that she mentioned, because starting here that young in this church raised me. And all these older people were my Sunday school teachers and my mentors in this church. So I just wanted to share that with you. Miss Bird was a very special person, and I was her daughter many, many, many times for the mother-daughter banquet. There were 4 girls in my family, and I was the oldest, and my sister was a year younger than me, and then we had another sister that came about 6 years later, and another one 8 years later. So we were farmed out to the ladies in the church to be their daughters for the mother-daughter banquets, and so I've been to a lot of those too. And it was just, and I do have Miss Bird's book that she wrote, but she was just such a wonderful, wonderful, sweet lady. And she was a wonderful historian too. She was a big part of the Nampa community and of this church. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. There's Miss Bird if you'd never met Miss Bird. She could be formidable, but she really taught history. This is Doyle Kane. The drawing of Doyle Kane was done by Maurice Jones, who is one of Lester Jones's sons. And Maurice Jones is also married to Shirley Kane, Doyle Kane's daughter. And I used to babysit their kids when they would come in the summer. Louis Reichert had a high regard for Doyle Kane, and in Louis's writing, he says, "I can never forget the late Doyle Kane and his contribution to this congregation. Doyle was the person most responsible for me being an elder, as he was one of my ideal persons representing the Bible, representing what the Bible says an elder should be." Well, we've lost a few slides in the middle here, and I'm not quite sure who they are, where they went. That's what happens when you have to be gone and go to Disneyland for a week before you do this. But somebody's got to wear those ears. So at this time, without the picture that I had scared up, I'm going to invite Andy Johnson to come up, because you've heard Lucille mention his grandmother, who was the other 6th grade teacher. And if you had Mrs. Johnson for a 6th grade Sunday school class, that was like going to Bible boot camp. So Andy?
Well, I really don't have a whole lot to say about my grandmother. It's been so long ago, I can't remember. But I do know she loved to teach and encourage kids to learn. And part of her way of encouraging kids to learn, she had a star chart with about 25 different things that she used to encourage kids to learn throughout their year in their class.
I want to say this. On Pentecost, she made a big 2-layer chocolate cake for us to celebrate it with.
And as Linda Wintroth said, and we used to come early to Sunday school so we could get our stars on the chart. On Sunday, May 6th, 2001, the new entrance to the church and the remodel was dedicated. And it's pretty interesting that May 6th is really close to May 8th, when we first worshiped in this building. This is an ordination service. We haven't had too many of those in recent years, but for a period of time, they were quite regular. This is the ordination of John King, the one kneeling on the far left. Now, when I first came, I was having a hard time finding information about John King. And the only person I have encountered here who knew who he was is Clarion. And she said, "Oh, yes, he was in high school when I was in junior high. He was a heartthrob." John King he went to Northwest Christian College, and he became a missionary in Paraguay. And his health brought him back to the States early, and he died in his 40s. And I have some books that his widow wrote about their ministry in Paraguay. And the one in the center kneeling is Maurice Jones. Again, we met him earlier as the artist of Doyle Kane's portrait. And he went on into pastoral ministry. And the one kneeling on the far right is Hap Lyda. And we've had Hap Lyda here for the 100th anniversary of the church and his service in ministry, and is the author of several books. This is Arthur Stanley, who was ordained. This is a writing from Francis Coyle. On June 24th, 1934, Two momentous occasions happened at the church at the close of the morning worship service. Arthur Stanley was ordained into full Christian service as a minister in the Christian church. And after his ordination, and Barb, are you with me? After the ordination, and to the strains of the wedding march played by Mrs. Lester Jones, Willis and Charles Coyle walked down one aisle, while Frances Carson and Marilyn Burkholder walked down the other and met at the front of the sanctuary, where Willis and Frances were married by the Reverend Lester Jones. Now, that was kind of a tradition that happened sometimes in those days. And to supplement that, today we have a vow renewal. And I'm going to turn this back to Steve now.
There was a tradition where couples would actually get married during the worship service, come forward. And that's actually a beautiful setting. Certainly helps with all the planning. You already have the worship service to deal with. And you just come up, the couple would come up and be married and then sit back down and the worship service continues. We have a couple here who has been married for 23 years yesterday, I believe. And that's Dell and Sandy Oswald. And God has blessed both of you at a little later stage in life to have each other, to bring you together, and to be able to share these past 23 years together. Now, Dell, I know you weren't planning on being up here. This is all Sandy's doing, okay?
I wasn't even planning on getting married.
We are here to renew their vows today, and this was something that your beloved wanted to do here in this church that you both love very much. We both came on board here about the same time, 13 years ago, and you've been an amazing support and a joy in my life and my family's life. And for me, it's a tremendous privilege for us to be able to renew your vows together. I'm going to share these words. I'm going to state a script here, okay? We gather here today to celebrate your marriage of 23 years. We rejoice in your continuing love for each other as you renew your vows. We thank God for the passion and joy which you have known and the strength with which you have been blessed. Today, you declare publicly before God, family, and friends of your union and reaffirm your lasting commitment as partners in love and life. You will declare that in despite of the difficulties and hardships of life, that with God's help, you will continue to love and be faithful to one another. You again commit yourselves to a love for one another that involves the total giving of yourselves. You covenant to accept each other totally, creating a safe and loving space for each other to grow as individuals and partners as you journey together in this adventure of life and faith. You make this covenant today before God and the creator of life that you share and the giver of that special love that you have for each other. May that love you now share continue to grow and blossom in the years to come and be sustained by God, family, and friends by this recommitment you make this day. Dell and Sandy, you are about to make promises of love to one another. These promises declare your continuing love to be a special commitment which will strengthen your lives for whatever situation you may face. May you be graced with the strength and the courage, not merely of two, but of three, for God is always with you. I want you both to hold hands, look each other in the eye. Don't look at me when you're repeating these vows. As we share these vows, as you share these vows with each other. Del, traditionally the man goes first, okay? Just repeat after me. I, Del, take you, Sandy,
I, Del, take you, Sandy,
to be my wife,
to be my wife,
to have and to hold
to have and to hold
from this day forward,
from this day forward,
for better, for worse,
for better or for worse,
for richer, for poorer,
for richer or poorer,
in sickness and in health,
in sickness and in health,
to love and to cherish,
to love and to cherish,
till death do us part,
till death do us part,
according to God's holy law.
to God, according to God's holy law.
This is my solemn vow.
This is my solemn vow.
God bless you. Sandy, repeat after me as you look in the eyes of your beloved. I, Sandy, take you, Del,
I, Sandy, take you, Del,
to be my husband,
to be my husband,
to have and to hold
to have and to hold
from this day forward,
from this day forward,
for better, for
for
worse,
better, for worse,
for richer, for poorer,
for richer, for poorer,
in sickness and in health,
in sickness and in health,
to love and to cherish,
to love and to cherish,
till death do us part,
till death do us part,
according to God's holy law.
according to God's holy law.
This is my solemn vow.
This is my solemn vow.
Let us pray. Spirit of God, in whom we live and move and have our being, you have given us the life and grace of human love that draws us to each other. Today we pray for Del and Sandy in their continued life together. We are thankful for the joy they find in each other and the hope they declare in this act of renewing their marriage vows. May they always be strengthened to keep the vows they have made and cherish the life they share and to honor each other in love. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. God bless you both.